Son of a bitch!
Give me a drink! That's Rachel's song.
It's a great song.
We should actually get her to bring her bodacious tatas to show them what filled that bra for this episode.
And singlet.
And singlet, yes.
Yes, seeing as it featured so prominently.
Absolutely. All right, would you like to do the honours or shall I?
Well, 'tis thine hacienda, my man.
Yes. Well, I'm very excited.
Are you just?
Do you know why?
Why are you so excited?
I am so excited because it's officially episode 3.
Woo!
We've made it to 3.
We've made it to 3.
And that was like, no, that shouldn't even there. That's how exciting it was.
I've always heard that your pop doesn't always fizzle. Well, it does fizzle on occasion, but you know.
That's my story of my life there, right there. Anyway, welcome to episode 3 of BoozBrothers.tv. This is going to be a big, big episode. Do you know why? A live studio audience.
Of 3.
Of 3. For episode 3.
Party of 3s. Power of 3.
So if we can find one extra person for next week's episode, it would be, that'd be 4 for 4.
That could be a bonus. Would our videographer count as 4 if he's actually here?
If he shows up for one of these sessions. Anyway, so here we are. Ready to rock and roll. I've actually brought us a little treat for today too.
We've got some popcorn.
My ever-loving wife bought me the sweet and salty popcorn. Say no more.
Say no more. Say no more. Let's leave that right there.
Well, I'm going to crack the lid on that sucker, so just in case.
You crack the lid on that. If you feel the urge to have a crunch,
I might be a little peckish.
crunch.
Anyway, so I see a brown paper bag.
We have a brown paper bag, which means that we have a whiskey to drink.
We have. Oh, it's a whiskey.
It is a whiskey.
Oh, a little bit of a pre. Can I? No, I better not yet.
How about get the glasses, Dave?
Tumblers?
Tumblers, as always, whiskey glasses for a whiskey. To the fridge.
Gotta love fridge cam. Yes, and once again, please remember to drink responsibly, and if not, all the taxi friends, carry all that stuff around with you. Sleep over, take a swag. We're here to appreciate the finer things in life. Now, we can appreciate whatever's in this magnificent brown paper bag. I do love the way you've wrapped it, by the way.
Oh, look, years of practice working in a liquor store, it's just how it goes, unfortunately.
Do we want ice?
This one's actually very good. Neat.
Wow. It's that good?
It's quite good. Bang for buck. Good stuff.
All right.
So, would you like to unwrap that because I've got some notes, because in our last episode we sort of touched on a few things, and I said that we would give you some more information about whiskies, distillation processes, and what makes a single malt, what makes a blend.
Right, yes.
So I've got my notes.
You got your notes. So
I've got notes.
We take this shit seriously. We have researched. When I say we...
Me.
Yes. Because I'm obviously not here for the intelligence. So we're going to drink this neat. I'm going to unpack...
Dave's going to unpack and pour.
And pour.
And pour.
Well,
why not? Well, I go into this.
Look
All
at
right.
that just pour.
So, while he's being very tender with that, the word whiskey, regardless of which way you want to spell it, it comes from a Gaelic word meaning water. And in the old Gaelic and in Latin, it was known as Aqua Vita, the water of life.
Very clear, this one.
Whiskey is, well, as I've said before, I have a lot of whiskies in my collection and I like variety. And of course that means that, I don't always drink the same thing all the time. So of course I've got lots of half bottles, and I've yet to share this one with you, I believe.
Well,
I know I've sold you one of these before.
Yes. He's always selling me shit.
So, just as I mentioned the spelling, we'll sort of touch on that. There's 2 schools of thought on the spelling. One is simply that it's a regional thing, so, as in different language, whether you're English, Scottish, interpretations, etc. Doesn't matter whether you spell it with an E or a Y, or EY, I should say. It really doesn't matter, so it's personal preference. And the other schooling is that the spelling of whiskey should depend on the origin or style of the whiskey itself, which really doesn't matter that much, to be honest. So, whiskey, of course, it's a distilled beverage made from fermented grain mash.
Hence the Dickel mash from 2 episodes ago.
Hence, Tennessee sour mash, etc., etc.
I just wanted to say Dickel again.
I know.
I'm going to slip a Dickel in every episode as much as I can.
You're going to do the best that you can, aren't you, mate?
I am indeed.
All right. So, into the nuts of it as such when it comes to a single malt or a blend. Okay? So, a single malt Scotch or single malt whiskey is a malt whiskey which is made in Scotland. It can't be Scotch if it's not from Scotland. And it also, to be a single malt, has to be distilled at a single distillery. So if someone, for argument's sake, this is where Chivas Regal is simply a blend, because they take whiskies from other distilleries and blend them on premise, store them and bottle them on premise. So it is a blended whiskey because they come from more than one distillery.
So it's not a single malt because it's like one malt.
No.
It's single because it came from one distillery, and it's a malt.
A single malt can actually contain several different malts, but it's a single malt because it comes from the one distillery.
Bit of false advertising, don't you reckon?
To a point, because, I mean, the malts are all created in-house.
Right.
So they're all created to their own recipes, but then by blending the different malts, and also different ages of malt, and different ages of whiskies, it, brings together its own unique taste.
So it could be a multitude of...
A multitude of malts.
Malts.
Well played, sir. Well played. So, okay, made from a mash of malted grain, and in Scotland the only grain that is allowed to be used in a single malt is barley. You had to put the cue ball up there, didn't you? You're a cheeky little sod. Okay, so malt indicates that the whiskey is distilled from a malted grain, can be barley, rye, wheat, etc. But as I said, single malt Scotch always uses barley.
So, vegans can drink whiskey.
They most certainly can.
All you vegans out there, I just want to let you know we're bringing the vegan to appreciate,
So there we go. Vegan friendly.
Vegan-friendly BoozBrothers.tv is a vegan-friendly show.
All right.
No animals were harmed in the making of this whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. One would hope not. Okay, so a blended malt Scotch whiskey is a mixture of single malt Scotches, but not a mixture of malted barley whiskey and non-barley whiskies. So they're a little different again. It gets a little confusing. You can look this up on Wikipedia yourself, or there's a number of different websites around the globe that will give you all the information that you want to know.
So, this particular
one, this is the Johnny Walker Green Label. It is a blended malt.
A blended malt. So,
Okay.
if all that you just went through...
So, effectively, they've taken, I believe it's 4 single malt whiskies and blended them together in such a process that they can still call it a blended malt.
Blended malt Scotch whiskey because it is a product of Scotland.
It is a product of Scotland, and of course you will note on the bottom of the label there it says that it's 15 years matured. Okay, so that means the time that is spent in the cask.
Because we also discovered last episode that Scotch and whiskey matures in the cask or the barrel,
in the bottle.
not in the bottle.
That is correct. And the age statement on any bottle of whiskey, whether it be a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, etc., refers to, as we said, the number of years, and it is the age of the youngest whiskey in the mix. So there's every chance that there are whiskies older than 15 years in this one, but 15 is the youngest malt that's in there.
Right.
So there you go.
So it could have actually more than a 15-year-old in there, but 15 is the youngest.
Correct.
From the barrel.
From the barrel, not the bottle.
Right.
Shall we?
Well, we shall, and once again, this is actually probably the best one because once we have Johnny Walker glasses and the Johnny Walker Green Label.
So we've actually got it right.
We got it right this time. Sensational. Well,
as always, cheers, my
cheers.
friend. A quick little sniff. It's nice to get some aroma before you put it in your mouth.
That's what she said.
But tis. And it is a lovely, lovely,
yeah.
smooth, easy drinking blended malt.
I forgot how nice that was.
There's only a very, very slight peatiness in that one, which I will explain in further detail very shortly.
Right. So in the family of Johnny Walkers, Where does this rank or sit?
The
It's not the
green
oldest
label
brother. It's not.
sits around the middle.
Well, there we go. The dog's right at it again. Like we said, live.
Anything can happen.
Anything can happen.
Often does.
And often does. So,
It sits, personally I say it sits around the middle of the range. It comes in, depending on where you shop, around $75 to $90. And it fits in there very, very nicely. As I said before, great bang for buck whiskey, this one.
right. So when you go, so we'll start with you get your Johnny Red.
Red label, then you go black label, double black, and technically that slots in between the double black and the gold reserve.
Right between the double black and the gold.
If you're looking at price point.
Right.
Personally, I think that's better than the gold reserve, but the platinum 18 is just a little smoother and a little more pleasant.
And the gold reserve is the one actually with the golden bottle, right? Or is that the platinum
It's a
reserve?
limited release in a gold painted bottle,
Right.
but the standard bottle simply has a gold label, clear bottle.
Right.
So there you go.
So this is the middle to upper end.
Middle to upper end.
Well, yeah. Because also then there's the blue, and then there's.
It was quite readily available for a long time. Then, for some bizarre reason, they switched it to a duty-free purchase only. But the good news is now it should be available from your local independent retailer anytime you want to get one. They may not have it in stock, but if you ask them nicely, they'll probably get you some, if you know what I mean.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more.
You were watching a Monty Python movie too over the past week, were you not?
Recently, yes, I watched The Life of Brian again. It is one of my favourite Python things
He's
of
a
all
very
time.
naughty boy.
He's a very, very naughty boy, and my favourite line has to be when they're being crucified at the end. Not that I condone that sort of thing.
We're anti-crucifixion.
Pilate has decided that they shall release Brian. And of course the
Didn't have to
centurion
free
comes
Warwick
looking
first?
for him, and of course Brian's busy mid-rant and doesn't hear them calling out his name, and there's a bloke at the back that yells out, "I'm Brian and so's my wife."
Yes.
Absolute favourite bit. But yes.
Yes. Anyway, so
All right. Just a little bit more on the actual manufacturing distillation process. Malting itself. Okay, the barley used to make the whiskey is malted by soaking the grain in water for 2 to 3 days, which allows it to germinate. Okay, this process, I'm reading direct from my notes here.
Yeah, it's all right.
This process releases enzymes which convert starch to fermentable sugars.
it's really it's a real science, isn't it?
It is very, very much a science. You can actually do degrees and things in the production and distillation of various spirits.
I've got my Cert 4 in Scotch.
Which is why the bigwigs that really, really concentrate on the tasting and the processes and the blending are referred to as a master distiller for good reason.
Right, and so you got to think back then. Like when did they first start?
Well, you want to go back to the history?
Well, even though, I just want to, you think about the science involved when they made it way back then.
I suppose when they first started
It's like
making
alchemy.
it, it's possible there was a happy accident and an
Yes.
element of alchemy.
Yeah.
And the process has been refined over the centuries.
But yeah, so Leonardo da Vinci and they, with the whole turning Hudson Hawk, phenomenal movie.
Turning lead into gold.
Turning lead into gold.
Well, there is only one molecule of
whatever it
difference
is.
between lead and gold.
The element on the tip. So, that's all great. But if you could turn all those barley and hops and stuff and mash or whatever into liquid gold, that is
Yes.
quite impressive.
In my reading, I did find the earliest written record of whiskey production in Scotland from malted barley. It's on the 1494 Exchequer Rolls. I'm assuming that's a scroll of sort, which reads 8 bolts of malt to Friar John Core by order of the king, wherewith to make Aqua Vita, the water of life,
The water of life.
to the amount of approximately 500 bottles.
So it wouldn't be inappropriate to refer to this as the nectar of gods,
Absolutely.
if it is the water of life.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was the Greeks actually had a god of wine in Bacchus. So
The Greeks always liked the Bacchus.
So they say. So they say. Indulgences of which we shall not discuss.
Anyway, moving right
so
along.
they soak the barley in water for 2 to 3 days in order for it to start germinating. Then the germination is halted by heating after 3 to 5 days when the optimum amount of starch has been converted to fermentable sugars. The method for drying the germinated barley is by heating it with hot air produced by an oil, coal or even electric heat sources. In most cases, some level of smoke from a peat-heated fire is introduced to the kiln to add phenols, a smoky aroma and flavour to your whiskey. So
That's where it comes
if
from.
a whiskey that you're drinking has a real earthy taste to it, that's the smoke from the peat itself.
Right.
Peat is basically a compacted moss,
Right.
which is an awesome fuel source. The Scots have known that for many, many, many centuries and have made fantastic use of that. Now, once it's dried out sufficiently, they then mill it into a coarse flour to which they add hot water to extract the sugars. So
this is sugar-free?
Unfortunately not.
No. Okay.
Unfortunately not. I mean, the biggest thing with when you consume alcohol,
Yes.
the body itself converts the alcohol back to sugar. So, which
Way
is
better
why...
drink. And so I could have my this with my cereal? Would that be just as easy and just...
Special K, well and truly, well and truly. All right, so the hot water dissolves the sugars. The enzymes then act on the starch left over from the malting stage, continuing the conversion to sugar and producing a sugary liquid called a wort. Not to be confused with the things that sometimes grow on your knees or a witch's nose.
All right.
Yeast is then added to the wort.
And we won't talk about yeast.
No. In a large vessel and commonly made of Oregon pine or stainless steel. These days, that is. The yeast feeds on the sugars and as a byproduct produces both carbon dioxide and alcohol.
Alcohol.
Alcohol. The process is called fermentation. Obviously, it takes up to 3 days. When complete, the liquid has a content of 5 to 7% by volume alcohol and is now known as a wash. The wash is then distilled, so heated, boiling off the alcohol, which has a lower boiling point than water itself.
Right.
Bet you didn't know that.
I did not know that. Is that got anything to do with why alcohol, this type of alcohol does not freeze?
Yes, because it has a lower freezing temperature.
I remember that from the last episode.
So, obviously the vapour, which contains the alcohol, is collected, cooled, condenses back to a liquid form. Scotch whisky, they distill it twice.
Right.
Okay, at the end of the initial distilled spirit has a volume of about 20 to 40, and once they do the second distillation, the final spirit has an alcohol content of 60 to 70%. Now, big difference between Scottish whisky or Scotch and Irish whiskies is the Irish do a third distillation on all of their whiskies, which they say produces a smoother, more palatable taste.
And one from Ireland and one from Scotland.
Absolutely. Okay, so that is then diluted to about 62.5% before it is placed in the cask to mature. And by law, all Scotch whisky must be aged for a minimum of 3 years in oak casks.
Minimum of 3.
Minimum of 3 years.
Now, does somebody police that?
They do. It is
The
policed
Scotch
very,
police?
very closely. The whisky police.
Yeah.
What a job that would be. Oh, I'm sorry, this one's just not good enough, laddie. We're going to have to confiscate
It's the
it.
only time when the police are actually the drunk ones.
So there you go.
Sure.
So minimum 3 years in the oak cask, though many single malts are matured for much longer. As we said, the youngest in this blend is 15 years. And of course there are multitudes of whiskies, 21, 25, 30, even up to 50 and 60 years of age.
Wow.
Which you will pay for accordingly.
Right.
Because of effectively the space and the time that it takes to actually have them sitting there and maturing for that long.
Right.
So there you go. Continues to develop and change as it spends time in the wood, taking flavour from the wood itself. And of course, during the time, a percentage of each cask will actually evaporate,
Right.
which also helps concentrate the flavours. The evaporated amount is known as the angel share, which reinforces again that whiskey is a gift from the gods.
And the angels then, of course, the angels share.
Absolutely. So, of course, that's basically how whiskies are made. And effectively, the big difference between Scottish whisky, and just let me switch over a page here. and American whiskies is the type of mash that they use. So whether they use barley, like the Scots, bourbon uses a corn maize,
Right.
so a corn mash. There are dedicated corn whiskies, also malt whiskies, rye whiskey, and malted rye. So they have a blend of malt and rye. There's percentages there, but I don't think we need to go that far into detail.
No. Well, there you go.
So there you are.
Episode 3 has become a history lesson and a science lesson.
Have you learnt something?
I have learned tremendous amounts. I've learned a plethora. I've learned a multitude of things today. Let's throw that one in one more time.
But yes, a multitude of things.
That is awesome.
Now, of course, whiskey is made all around the world. There are some sensational whiskies from Tasmania, as we've mentioned before, Sullivan's Cove. 2014, Jim Murray named one of their small batch whiskies as the best in the world at the time. But of course, because it's distilled outside of Scotland, it's not a Scotch.
No.
Even though you could put it side by side against other Scotches, and the taste would not be much different.
So, are all the Tasmanian whiskies related to each other?
Well, it's a family-owned business.
Sorry.
And
That reminds me, actually, one of my very first girlfriends I ever had when I lived here in Australia, it was back in 1981. I brought her to meet my dad, and my mum and dad, and said, this is my girlfriend, she's Tasmanian. And I said, Dad, it's all right, don't panic, she's a virgin. And he went off his tree. He said, look, son, get rid of her. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, get rid of her. I'm like, Dad, come on, this is a new girlfriend. I'm just like, this is, one of my first girlfriends ever had. And he goes, son, she's not good enough for her family, she's not good enough for ours.
somehow I knew you were going there, but I just thought I'd let you finish nonetheless. You just can't help yourself.
No.
It's terrible. There are more details with different types of whiskies. I'm just going to ignore this right now. As to the percentage of alcohol is distilled to, what percentage or proof it is actually barreled at. Like for argument's sake, to truly be called a bourbon in the USA, it's supposed to be bottled at an ABV of 40% or more, or 80 proof, if you will.
And this is 43%.
Absolutely, but it is a Scotch.
Yes.
So there you go. And as we mentioned previously with regards to Jack Daniels, it's not a bourbon.
It's not a bourbon.
It's not a bourbon because they use a sour mash and, of course, the filtration through maple charcoal, which leaves a residue, classing as an additive, which makes it a Tennessee sour mash whiskey and not a bourbon whiskey. I'm really, really narky about that sometimes. But anyway, and I did actually find some information on your homeland and their whiskies.
Ah.
In case you didn't know, the Profits from Canada, Canadian Club, the best known Canadian whiskey, which helps to explain why there's actually not that much whiskey in Canada, because they do use cereal grains, they do age it in wood barrels.
I believe it's cornflakes.
They do a lot of rye whiskies.
Yeah, very much so, actually.
As well.
We'll probably have a go at this. It's not a Canadian Club episode today, but we'll...
Oh, look, we'll definitely have a go at the Canadian Club at some stage. But the more than 70% of Canadian whiskey is actually exported to the rest of the world.
Right. And actually, a lot of Canadians refer to the whiskey as rye.
Yes, absolutely.
So we actually, Crown Royal would be another very popular,
very, very popular,
and because it comes in a nice
little whiskey,
nice purple bag and everything like that. Is very the packaging is.
It is a glorious whiskey, not necessarily a cheap whiskey. Fantastic. So, of course, getting back to the Scotch itself.
Yes.
Most distilleries in Scotland are not owned by the Scottish. Suntory owns Morris and Bowmore, of course. Bowmore whiskey, very nice. LVMH, I'm not sure what that stands for, but they own Ardbeg.
Right.
And Glenmorangie, absolutely amazing stuff. I do have a bottle of that at home, which
I've only had
saving.
That once, which someone gave me as a gift.
It's absolutely stunning.
But there's a Glenmorangie, and it had a different name, like another name to it.
Yeah. Look, they quite often with certain whiskies, they will actually put people's names on them as a tribute.
Yeah, this was like $100 and something, $110 bottle of Glenmorangie.
Yeah.
Morangie something. It was like,
and of course, if they do some secondary aging in a sherry barrel, that'll be on the labelling and things like that as well.
Sherry, I'm in love. Hold on.
Steve Perry, ladies and gentlemen, making a cameo appearance. What else? Pernod Ricard, which is a French company. Of course, Pernod
yes.
itself.
Used to drink that a lot in my youth. Pernod
They actually own Chivas Regal.
Oh.
And then you have the spirit giant of the world, Diageo, who actually own Bundaberg Distillery here in Australia. They also own Johnny Walker Distillers in Scotland.
Sadly, we will also do an episode on Bundaberg Rum.
Yeah, I really don't want to, but we're going to.
We're going to bring special guests in for that episode so that they can drink it and we can just talk about it.
But the good news, one of the largest distillers that still remains under Scottish ownership is William Grant and Sons, of course. Grant's whiskey, which is a great little quaffing whiskey, if you will. It's good for a mixer, like for a Scotch and Coke. They do some fantastic premiums as well, don't get me wrong.
It's funny you should say that because Grant's whiskey is one of the only whiskies that my beloved will actually drink.
It's a start.
She loves.
It's a start. We'll educate her some more, don't you worry. And William Grant and Sons, of course, the big one from them, which is still after, let's be honest, 20 years of drinking whiskies. Glenfiddich is produced by William Grant and Sons and still one of the greatest single malts ever to come out of Scotland.
Would they be happy with you calling Glenfiddich or Glenfiddich?
Depends on where you're from, mate. It really does. I mean, do you call it a Merlot? Or a Merlot?
Yeah.
Is it Shiraz or is it Syrah?
Yeah. I'm still confused with Sauvignon Blanc. That's why we're not doing wine.
Hence why we really don't care whether your whiskey is spelt with an E or whether it's just the KY on the end.
The ones with KY happen to go down a lot smoother, don't they? Nothing like
look, they just slide down the throat so easily, I must say.
So I've heard.
So apparently so.
Yes.
But yes,
nothing
you have it.
wrong with it. Anyway.
So that's your history lesson on whiskey. And on that subject, I think you appear to be empty.
Yes.
And by the time you get the cork out of that, I'll be empty.
So what are you suggesting? We should get this party started?
Absolutely, mate. Pour me a wee dram, if you will. On that subject, Did you know that a dram is actually a legitimate measurement? Although, let's face it, most people's dram is not accurate as to the proper thing. Dram is basically just refers to a small amount of any spirit, not necessarily whiskey. It is pretty much a Scottish word. But the technical measurement for a dram is 3.7 millilitres.
A dram?
No, that's actually 50 mils.
Oh, it's a drambuie.
That's a drambuie.
Which is 13 mils more? Did you say 37 mils?
No, 3.7.
Oh, 3.7.
3.7. So, a dram is literally just something to wet the whistle and take the edge off the chill, perhaps.
Perhaps indeed.
So
I should have taught myself.
You should have poured yourself a dram while you were at it. And as Dave pours us a dram, I think that's a good note for us to finish on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll call that a wonderful history lesson. A trip down, I've lost my memory lane.
Yeah. So by all means, as I said, if you want to research your favourite distiller, you can usually contact them through their websites and request a history. Some of them have a history on their websites, or even just Google the distiller itself and see what it comes up with. And, there's always Wikipedia.
Yes, and as we like to end every episode.
Cheers to you, my friend.
Son of a bitch!
Why did you bring the disco ball out?
Get this party started.
You just can't help yourself.